Welcome to Two Doctors Homestead. My name's Daniel, and this is the weekend edition of Two Doctors Prepping, formerly known as Tactical Tuesday. Tuesday wasn't really working out, and I'm not sure the conversations were particularly tactical. We're really focused on helping people be prepared and have those kinds of conversations. Time management is a big deal, right, for everyone, especially if you're homesteading. You got animals to take care of, and if you're homesteading and working, time's an even bigger challenge sometimes to have the free time to even do things like this, produce content. And I'll probably throw the Bowie knife here in a little bit since I'm out by the Bowie Target, but I wanted to get this out. I think is relevant with everything going on in the world, everything going on in the United States right now, to think about how time impacts your preparations, right? Help you focus, whether you're new to prepping or you've been prepping for a long time. Sometimes you can get a little overwhelmed by the idea, what do I need to prepare for? What's happening, right? What difficult situation could I find myself in the future that I'd want to be prepared for? So we're going to talk about the rule of threes, right? It's a common term in the prepping community, but I think it's more relevant now than ever, right? I think it helps you organize. It's going to get you focused on where you need to get your preps, whether you have $5 a week or $500 a week, right? It doesn't matter. You need to organize. You need to understand what your priorities should be. Certainly we're all limited on time. So first rule of threes is 3 minutes, right? And you wonder, 3 minutes of what? 3 minutes without air. So your average person can survive 3 minutes without oxygen. Now, if you say you can survive 4 minutes, that's okay. It's not the point, right? It's not necessarily the number of minutes, but 3 minutes is important. Most cases right now we're surrounded by an abundance of fresh, clean air that we can breathe in. So some people would skip right over the first rule of threes, 3 minutes. But if you look at what's happened recently with train derailments, toxic chemicals getting blasted into the air, there was a plastics factory that melted down, more toxic chemicals getting blasted into the air. There is some chance you could find yourself in a situation where all your fresh, clean air is no longer available. So what can you do? I mean, there are respirators, there are gas masks. Not saying everyone needs to go out and buy a gas mask, but it is something to think about on your list of being prepared. I actually have a friend in Israel that he goes through bomb drills, bomb raids. The sirens will go off, and him and his wife have to go down in the basement. They have a bomb shelter there for when they have rocket attacks and incoming rockets, and they put on gas masks. So for him, for living in that world, it's very common. For here in the U.S., you're thinking, why do I need a gas mask? Maybe you don't, right? But it's something to think about, something to keep in mind. 3 minutes without error, right? The second rule of threes is 3 hours. So you say 3 hours without shelter, right? And I could sit by the pool all day and I'd be fine. But if you're in bad weather, if it's freezing out, if there's freezing rain, if you look at what happened in Buffalo, New York, and it was a tragedy, people froze to death in their cars. I'm not saying they weren't prepared. I can't speak to that, and I certainly wouldn't speak ill about them. But 3 hours without shelter, you need shelter, and a shelter isn't always going to be your car. A shelter isn't always going to be your house, right? If you lose power, your car or your house can get cold very quickly, right? So, a good jacket can be shelter. A sleeping bag can be shelter. A poncho can be shelter. A good tent can be shelter. Think about shelter. 3 hours without shelter. What do you have as your backup shelter? Once again, if your power goes out, your house is going to get very cold. It's no longer providing shelter from the cold, right? So it's something to think about. 3 minutes, 3 hours. The next one is 3 days. So 3 days without water. That's about as long as a human can survive without water, is 3 days. So do you have water? And once again, you might be thinking, well, yeah, I turn on the tap and endless fresh water pours out of the tap, and that's normal. That's normal here in America. That's not normal all over the world. Certainly I wouldn't ever want that to stop for us. I always like getting fresh water out of the tap, but you have to think in an emergency situation, in a grid down situation, in a chemical spill situation, you might not have that fresh water available all the time. So do you have any water stored away, any 1-gallon jugs filled up with water, any extra water bottles? Do you have a water filter? Right, it may come a time. Certainly there's even areas in America that don't have access to fresh water all the time. They have to boil their water. They have to switch to bottled water. So 3 days without water, important to think about. Then the last rule of threes is 3 weeks, 3 weeks without food. Once again, that's an average. You watch Naked and Afraid, they do 21 days sometimes without food, and they drop a lot of weight. And maybe you can make 4 weeks without food. Once again, not the point. But do you have food stashed away? And I know as a prepper, as someone that's prepared, it's easy to get a couple extra cans of canned goods or something like that on the shelf. Even if you only have a couple dollars a week, you can start to build up a food supply. But when you're focusing on what you need to be prepared for, don't forget the other threes, right? You can have all the canned goods in the world. If you don't have fresh air to breathe, you're not going to last very long. If you don't have good shelter, you're not going to last very long. And the same thing with fresh water. So prioritize your preparation, right? And think about how different environmental factors or different unknowns could put you in a situation where maybe you don't have fresh air, right? And you're in your car in the winter, don't want you to get stuck in a snowdrift. Do you have some things in your car that would help you stay warm, right? And there's a lot of options out there for that, whether it's just some blankets in the trunk, or you could have as much as, people look at little Mr. Buddy heaters in the back, something to keep you warm, especially if you're in the wintertime, right? If you're driving in an area that's snow or could get hit by a snowstorm, having something in your car could save your life. And there's a flip side. It's not just winter. If you're in the desert, if you're in Arizona, I've spent a lot of time in the desert in Arizona, you dehydrate really quickly, right? So do you have, once again, water? 3 days without water, not so much in the desert. And really you get into shelters, are you protected from the heat? So 3 days or 3 hours without shelter is not always about just the winter time. There can be a lot of situations, right, where you need that shelter to survive. Once again, same thing with the water. Don't just focus on big piles of extra food and rice and beans, right? You're going to need water long before you're going to need food. And there are situations where you could lose access to that. So I hope that helps you focus. So there's a lot going on in the world right now, a lot of things to make you think and wonder, am I prepared if something happened to me? So don't panic. Obviously, the worst thing you can do is panic. You see people every time it gets to winter and there's a storm out here, they panic and they all run to the grocery store every time and load up a cart full of food, and usually it's milk and bread, because they're not prepared, right? They haven't thought it out. They haven't thought ahead of time, what would I do if a train derails and my city's full of toxic smoke? Or what would I do if I couldn't drink the tap water anymore? Once again, common in places. What do I do if I lose power in a winter storm? If you think about that ahead of time, start moving in the direction of preparing for that, you won't have to panic when something happens, right? You'll work on your plan. You'll just start going through it and say, okay, we have this, we're okay. We can survive without power for a few days, right? Or, hey, the car's stuck, but I've got my blanket, I'll be okay. Right, so we appreciate you. Once again, this is the weekend edition of Two Doctors Prepping. Stay tuned for more, and we appreciate you for watching the videos. Thank you.